Big Daddy V is a juggernaut that made an impact on several generations of fans. He was a larger-than-life character as we don't see often, who was able to destroy his opponents like a beast, and inevitably, such a phenomenon had a mind-blowing life. It's a pleasure to meet you on the Wrestling Paradise to present you the most incredible stories about the one who was as capable of playing a sex addict as a scary monster. Are you wondering how this colossus was in real life? Do you want to discover the secrets of his rich career? Do you want to know if the gimmicks he had were inspired by his personality outside the ring? You've come to the right place, because in this video we're going to look at the craziest revelations about this mind-blowing wrestler that could shake up the vision you may have had of him. You are on the Wrestling Paradise, the most incredible stories about Big Daddy V. Let's go. Between 2005 and 2007, before becoming Big Daddy V, Nelson Frazier Jr. embodied another particularly memorable character, the world's largest love machine. His gimmick was hilarious and light years away from the powerful monster that he will later become. He was at the same time a great seducer, which will even lead him to kiss Trish Stratus and Candice Michelle, and a sexual obsessed with in particular this VIAGRA move, which created completely unlikely visuals. The name of this move was a mix between the one of his character Viscera and VIAGRA. And that is not an accident. Indeed, Teddy Long, the former general manager of SmackDown who was backstage at the same time, says that he sold VIAGRA to Viscera. According to him, the first time he had sold it to him, it did miracles to the point where, apparently, Viscera was looking at his penis wondering whose it was. The commentator Jim Ross even tells that Big Viz used to take VIAGRA in his hotel room to masturbate in front of erotic movies. And years later, when he wrestled in Japan, another incredible scene will take place, more or less in the same register. His colleague Rene Dupré, who worked with him in the Land of the Rising Sun, says that one evening, when they had drunk a lot of alcohol and were drunk, the juggernaut absolutely wanted to put his testicles in his colleague's mouth, something Rene still laughs about today. Anyway, Viscera himself says that this love machine character is not only the one he has preferred to be in his entire career, but also that it is very similar to how he is in real life. In fact, the whole idea of this gimmick came from Vince McMahon, since the big boss of the Federation simply noticed how his employee was backstage, and more specifically his way of dressing, and thought there was something entertaining to do with it. Between 2007 and 2008, Nelson Frazier Jr. embodied a character who left his mark on many fans, Big Daddy V. After having been in a rather comedic role in previous years, and having been totally at ease there, he transformed into a very impressive colossus who had, among other things, made a huge arrival at ECW where he would face CM Punk for the title, and also had a rivalry with The Undertaker at the beginning of 2008 at SmackDown, where he was one of the first victims of the famous Hell's Gate of the Dead Man. But what's crazy is that it's Vince McMahon who once again had the idea for this character, including this name of Big Daddy V. Apparently, the big boss of the Stamford Federation wanted him to stop with the blonde mohawk he had for a long time and let his hair grow, returning to its natural color. He also wanted him to no longer wear the white lenses he had, and above all, Vince wanted Nelson to wear only briefs and boots, basically a traditional wrestler look, which would have been unheard of with a physique like this. But Nelson wasn't a fan of the idea at all, and they argued for several weeks about it, until they finally found a compromise: this outfit that still shows a large part of Big Daddy V's upper body, enough to impress the fans anyway. Big Daddy V's career has had several chapters that really had nothing to do with each other, since he ended his career being a very serious juggernaut, while just before he was this funny character of the Love Machine. But even before that, he had already worked in Vince McMahon's company, since he was part of the Ministry of Darkness in 1999 alongside The Undertaker. But he was also there between 1993 and 1996, where he was first in the Men on a Mission team, and then King Mabel. Can you only imagine that 12 years before becoming Big Daddy V, he was already in the Federation and won the King of the Ring tournament? At that moment, we could have thought he was going to become one of the Federation's top guys, especially since he was in the SummerSlam main event in 1995 against the champion Diesel. But what ruined everything at the time was that he was only 24 years old, and that he lacked experience in the ring, which unfortunately made him dangerous for his opponents. At SummerSlam, for example, he dropped his entire weight at one point, namely more than 400 pounds, on Diesel's lower back, who was even angry in the ring after that, and who was going to be injured for several weeks. After the show, Vince McMahon was so furious about what happened that he wanted to fire Mabel on the spot, but it was Diesel himself who convinced him not to do it, telling him that it was amateurism, not intentional. For the record, a few weeks later, the Juggernaut would even break the Undertaker's orbital bone by accident, which would force the Phenom to wear a mask for a little while. In the long run, this label of an unsafe worker would end up prompting Vince McMahon to fire him for the first time at the beginning of 1996. One of the most memorable storylines that Nelson Frazier Jr. had when he was the world's largest love machine is his love story with the announcer Lillian Garcia. In the spring of 2005, he was going to hit on her for several weeks, including a scene where he was going to make her come and take a nacho in his mouth, and another where he was even going to start stripping. They would eventually get together, and Lillian was so in love in the storyline that she proposed to the Behemoth at the Vengeance pay-per-view in June 2005. But the love machine was going to betray her by letting himself be seduced by the Godfather and his temptations. About a year later, an incredible story took place and rekindled the flame between Viscera and Lillian, while it wasn't planned at all. Indeed, in June 2006, the wrestler Charlie Haas arrived for his match, and during his usual entrance, he ran into the ropes of the ring. Except that the problem is that Lillian Garcia, who had just announced his name, hadn't left the ring yet, and under Charlie's impulse, she will fall towards the outside and break her wrist, which is already crazy in itself. But where the officials were clever is that they used this accident to turn it into a storyline by making a match between Viscera, who wanted to avenge his ex-sweetheart, and Charlie Haas, who also had views on Lillian. What is even more absurd in this whole story is that in this match, the Love Machine is going to Simone drop Lillian Garcia after being blinded by Charlie, and while the poor announcer was down, he and Charlie were going to start laughing and become best friends to the point of forming a team together. A great example of how the company has been able to turn the negative into a positive, even if it is to create completely unlikely angles. As we have said before, in 1999, Nelson Frazier Jr. was part of the Ministry of Darkness clan, which was going to have memorable scenes that year, whether it was the kidnapping of Stephanie McMahon and that ceremony where The Undertaker wanted her to become his wife, or that iconic segment where Vince McMahon was revealed as the mastermind behind all this. It was a mind-blowing twist which wasn't supposed to take place this way at all, since originally it was supposed to be Christopher Daniels. As for the Juggernaut, it was at that time that he did the blonde mohawk, that he put on black lipstick, that he began to put on the white lenses. Moreover, he says that it took him an hour per eye to put them on, which is completely crazy. So, when we learn that this colossus was a member of the Ministry of Darkness, we can still ask ourselves a relevant question. How could he be part of it while a few years before he had seriously injured The Undertaker? How could the dead man, who was the leader of this faction but also the locker room leader, let this guy who had broken his orbital bone into this clan? In fact, it was quite an ingenious plan of the Phenom. Hold on tight. As Midian, another member of the Ministry of Darkness, revealed, the reason why The Undertaker integrated Viscera into the clan is precisely to avoid facing him. If the Juggernaut was one of his allies, he would not risk injuring him by accident since he would have no reason to face him. A smart move by Taker. And the number 2 is a story that took place at the very beginning of Nelson Frazier Jr.'s career in 1999. At that time, he started his journey in the company by being in the Men on a Mission team, which was very inspired by the hip-hop culture. He was in it alongside his friend Mo, with whom Nelson had already formed a team in the Indies the previous years, and Oscar, who didn't wrestle but who was their spokesperson since he was rapping. But the amazing thing is that the whole concept of this team comes from a completely unlikely situation. In fact, this Oscar guy wasn't a wrestler at all initially. One day he was in a casino in Las Vegas, and he found himself in the same elevator as Randy Savage, one of wrestling's biggest stars at the time. At that moment, Oscar was brave and improvised a freestyle in front of the wrestler for about 30 seconds. But what he didn't know is that Randy Savage was with Vince McMahon in this casino, and the big boss is going to end up seeing Oscar rap, and he was so impressed by his performance that he gave him his card telling Oscar to call him. Do you realize that without this freestyle, there would have been no Men on a Mission? Another incredible element is that despite their popularity, they never had a real tag team champions reign. On the other hand, they have already won this title against the Quebecers in a non-televised show in England in 1994, but they lost it again 2 days later. So here we can ask ourselves why this reign was so short. In reality, it's because in that show in England, Nelson had knocked out one of his opponents by accident, and At the moment when the latter was supposed to get up before the 3 count, he was out and didn't get up as expected, which enabled the men on a mission to win the match and therefore the title. Definitely at that time, it was better not to be in the ring with Nelson Frazier Jr. In March 2008, shortly after participating in the Elimination Chamber match, at the No Way Out pay-per-view, Big Daddy V mysteriously disappeared from the screens before being fired for the last time by the company a few months later. So at that moment, it was hard to understand what happened. Why had the awesome Big Daddy V been fired by the company with whom he had been on good terms for years despite everything? According to the wrestling media, the officials wanted the Juggernaut to lose weight, and they punished him by removing him from the shows in March 2008, before eventually firing him in August. But that's not at all what Big Daddy V told about it, which shows that the information of wrestling journalists should never be considered as gospel. The Juggernaut claims that he was never asked to lose weight, and that the one and only reason why he disappeared was because he had pneumonia, and that, under the influence of his wife who was worried about him, he went to see a doctor. And apparently it was because of the latter that he was fired, because he made certain comments about Big Daddy V's health that the company had no right to legally ignore. They had no choice but to dismiss him because of what this doctor had said about him, and it's a shame, because he was a larger-than-life and impressive character. Subsequently, he will even star in 2 movies, and it's true that given his physique he was perfect for cinema. He will die in February 2014 in his wife's arms. And looking at his very rich career in which he had several memorable characters, we can say that this Juggernaut definitely has an incredible story. And that's it for these craziest stories about Big Daddy V. As we could see, he had a long career that began in the early 90s and in which he was a member of the Men on a Mission, King Mabel, one of the Ministry of Darkness henchmen, the world's largest love machine, and in the end, this larger-than-life titan who made an impact on many fans. He completely reinvented himself on multiple occasions, and all these stories show us that he was appreciated by the Federation, since they revived him several times, giving him the opportunity to be as scary as funny. And that makes me offer you a debate. Is there, in your opinion, another superstar who had so many different characters and who was comfortable and good in each role? Tell us what you think. It will be a pleasure to read your comments and share our opinions together. We can say that this character really was larger than life. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay on the paradise of wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?